Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. I would like to welcome you. Bienvenidos a Sul Ross. I am Yvonne Reilly Vasquez, the Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Sul Ross. I've probably met many of you and your parents, those of you who are students. We would like to welcome you to one of our panel discussions, but particularly interested in Hispanic-Serving Institutions. This is part of a grant that we had funded from the Texas State University system as a way to increase our multiculturalism and studies about what that means for us here at Sul Ross State University. So I would like to welcome all of you again to be here. We have a great consultant. Many of you know Dr. Jarett Lujan. He has a long history here in the Big Bend, not only here at Sul Ross, but also in Marfa. And we are so excited to have a group of students from our Marfa ISD who are also joining us, and also future Lobos, right? We got scholarships. With all that said, I just want to say that Hispanic Heritage Month is, of course, happening right now, and we are thrilled to be part of this. Sul Ross has been an HSI for many, many years. You're going to hear more about that from Julie Vega, one of our professors. But after the presentation, let me say that again, you have a QR code on your table that you can fill out a survey and just let us know what you think about the information that you learn and where this all goes. But other than that, I just want us to get started because Dr. Lujan has a lot of information. So thank you again for being here. We're excited that you're here to learn more about being an HSI and what that means for Sul Ross. So viva Sul Ross.
Thank you once again for showing up. I also want to thank everyone that is streaming online with us. The QR code will be put up on the screen as soon as the lecture is over. I want to begin by thanking our administration for always supporting our efforts to present and offer the Lobo community, especially our students, opportunities to thrive in an environment that supports and honors all cultures. A special thank you to our president, Dr. Carlos Hernandez, who could not be with us today. Our provost, Dr. Bernie Canteñez. Did I say that right? That's a tongue twister. I am very honored to introduce her. I'm going to say her real quick, give you a heads up, because she is our first Hispanic female vice president for enrollment management, Dr. Yvonne Reilly Vasquez. Woo! Let's go. Let's go. And I would also like to thank our vice president for student affairs, Ben Teleska. I'm not sure if he's here or not, but he's also been a big part of what we're doing here on this campus. Without their support, we would not be making the progress that we're making now. Now, truly, without the hard work and dedication of the HSI Grant Committee, we wouldn't be able to be doing some of the things that we're doing today. This committee is comprised of faculty and staff whose commitment to this campus and our students is unmatched. So if any of our grant committee is here, would you please stand up so we can give you a round of applause? Y'all ladies better stand up. Yvonne, Diane, let's go. Y'all stand up. Dr. Briseño. Woo! Woo! Yeah, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning of great things that are unfolding and developing on our campus. Like Dr. Reilly Vasquez said, that we are at the tail end of Hispanic Heritage Month. What that is Hispanic Heritage Month takes place between September 15th to October 15th of every year as a time to recognize and celebrate the many contributions, diverse cultures, and extensive histories of the American Latino community. Beginning in 1968, how many of you all knew that? 1968, Hispanic Heritage Month was originally observed as Hispanic Heritage Week, but in 1988, they extended it to a full month. Since then, Hispanic Heritage Month has been celebrated nationwide through festivals, art shows, conferences, community gatherings, and so much more. The month also celebrates the independence days of several Latin American countries, including Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua on September 15th, Mexico on September 16th, and Chile on September 18th. They also include holidays that recognize Hispanic contributions, such as Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico Friendship Day, that is celebrated in the U.S. Virgin Islands. October 12th, which is today, we did this intentionally. October 12th is Dia de la Raza, Day of the Race, which is celebrated in recognition of the mixed indigenous and European heritage of Mexico, the mestizo character of its population. It is a time for teaching respect, dignity, and the inclusion of all people in our global society. This holiday should be observed to remind all people in all countries throughout the Americas about the history and current challenges and conditions that indigenous people are facing still to this day. But that is a story and presentation for another day. Today, we're here to celebrate and learn about Hispanic-Serving Institutions. Sul Ross is and has been an HSI since 1999. Woo! And I cannot think of a more qualified and passionate individual to speak on what it means to carry that designation other than Dr. Lujan. Dr. Lujan is a higher education professional for Marfa, Texas. Don't hold that against him. We love Marfa. We love Marfa. He graduated from Marfa High School in spring of 2012. He is a 2016, 17, and 19 graduate of Angelo State University. There, he served as student body president, ran track and field. After graduating with his degree in biology in 2016, Dr. Lujan entered the higher education profession as an admissions counselor serving the West Texas region for Angelo State. In 2017, he was appointed as the first Hispanic student regent of the Texas Tech University system. Woo! I'm sorry, anytime you're a first, I love it. During this service, he was selected as the coordinator for student activities and managed the Greek life and homecoming programs at Angelo State. In 2019, he left ASU to pursue his PhD in higher education research at Texas Tech University. His expertise and dedication to the work of servingness, particularly at Hispanic-Serving Institutions, is seen through his scholarship and service to minoritized populations across higher education institutions. Dr. Lujan now is an HSI Scholar Practitioner focusing on the experiences of Latina OX students on HSI campuses, how these campuses should be intentionally serving these students. Currently, he now serves as the inaugural director of HSI initiatives at his alma mater, Texas Tech University. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Dr. Jarett Lujan. Woo! I can't even hear y'all out there. Y'all need to get louder.
Let me get this. Check. Can y'all hear me? Yeah, awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that awesome introduction. I'm so happy to be here. It feels good to be back home in far West Texas. I don't know if you guys know this, but I moved away for a while to South Texas and served at A&M Kingsville for a little bit, but there's nothing like West Texas, and there's nothing like coming home to Sul Ross. So the Marfa students here, I'm really glad that you are here. I'm so glad that you came out to support. It's important. And this subject is very important. And I didn't know a lot about what HSIs were whenever I was exploring college. So I think this information will be important to you. My journey started here at Sul Ross. I was a dual credit student. That's how I met Julie. So the relation, and I took my SAT in this room. So little bit of PTSD being back in this room, but we've come full circle now. So I'm back, and I'm glad to be back here. I've already talked a little bit about, they've already mentioned a little bit about me, so I'm not going to worry about that. You guys know who I am. But I want to talk about what we're going to be talking about today. Little bit of fast facts, some brief history, growth about HSIs. We're going to dive into the HSI research, talk about how HSIs are supporting and have the impact and responsibility on the Hispanic Latino population. Talk about the Sul Ross story, what it means to be an HSI at Sul Ross. And then I always like to leave my presentations with at least 5 takeaways. So that way, if you tune me out for the next hour, that last slide is going to be really important to you for those last 5 takeaways. And then we'll have some time, hopefully at the end, for some questions. So as you're digesting this information, if you have some questions, just save them for later. I'd be happy to answer them later on. First, I want to start with defining these terms. So we hear a lot about Hispanic and Latino and Latina, Latinx, Latine, and it can get kind of confusing. I'm going to be using them interchangeably, but they don't mean the same things. They appear differently in the research. They appear differently from different quotes. They appear differently from depending on the resource or the statistics that I'm pulling for this presentation. So again, Hispanic refers to people who come from primary language is Spanish-speaking countries. So think Spain, Mexico, etc. Latino refers to, and its variations, refers to a person with origins anywhere in Latin America, so Mexico, South and Central American, and the Caribbean. The difference there is that in Latino countries, Latin countries, we also have countries like Brazil that don't speak Spanish. So those individuals aren't Hispanic, but they are Latino. Those are the difference between those two terms. So just wanted to point that out because I'm going to be using both as we continue on. So what is an HSI? Some of you be like, why am I here? What is this about? What is an HSI? What is Hispanic-Serving Institution? Well, basically, they're institutions of higher education that have full-time equivalent enrollment of undergraduate students that have at least 25% Hispanic Latino enrollment. Okay, so you have to have at least 25% undergraduate students that identify with the Hispanic and Latino population. There's also a second requirement on there to have at least 50% of your students be need-based or need-based Title V aid. So that's federal financial aid. The main one to point out, and the one that I want to focus on today, is that 25%. If you ask anybody what an HSI is, that's usually the definition that they go for, is that we have to have at least 25% of our enrollment be Hispanic-serving institutions, to be in a Hispanic-serving institution. Importantly, though, this is just enrollment. It has nothing to do with retention. It has nothing to do with our graduation rates. So there is a possibility to actually lose this designation, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Some benefits of being an HSI. Well, if you're an HSI, you get access to grant money, but really the focus is transforming the improvement and attainment of first-generation college students. That's all the college students that are the first time to go to college, Pell eligible, need-based students, rural and underserved populations, but with a focus on Hispanic student enrollment and graduation and retention. This enables HSIs to increase and enhance their academic offerings, programs, and institutional stability as well. The benefits of being HSI, like I said before, are that it basically enables us to apply for federal grants, right? So if you're an HSI and you have achieved all the definitions and you're designated an HSI, that means that you have the opportunity to apply for these grants. That doesn't mean that we just get money. We have to actually apply for it. And the reason why I have this one underlined is Sul Ross actually just got awarded a Title V grant, Part A grant. So yeah, clap up. That's a big accomplishment. That 2.9, it's a $2.9 million grant about, right? Correct. And it's going to serve the population really, really well. And I'll kind of go into that later on and how important it is and how competitive it is to actually get these funds. But being an HSI, this is one of the biggest benefits, that we have access to federal money and we apply for it usually on a 5-year cycle, depending on it. I want to kind of walk through how we got here, some history of HSIs, how we even got this designation, et cetera. And to start, we see early Hispanic higher education attainment in Catholic Southwest institutions, so in this area, but at Catholic schools. Right after that, we see after post-World War II, the Hispanic immigration to the United States starts increasing, partly due to the Braceros program, if you're familiar with that program. Work migrants from Mexico come over to work, they get work visas, et cetera, they stay, et cetera. Families start establishing, they want to go to college, et cetera, for socioeconomic upkeep or uplift. Then we start seeing in the late 1980s into the early 90s, this emergence of a designation. A bunch of advocates get together and they say, there are these schools, these institutions of higher education that are enrolling lots of Hispanics. They have a lot of Hispanics on their campus. They're graduating a lot of Hispanics on their campus. The federal government should step in and give them money. We need to establish some sort of way that we can funnel money to these institutions because they're historically underfunded. So how can we get them some help? So that happens in the early 1980s into the 90s. Then we start seeing, as the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act is coming up, they insert in 1992 language that inserted HSI, the HSI designation under Title III, which is where HBCU funding and tribal college funding exists as well. Not long after that, when the Higher Education Act was reauthorized in 1998, we see Title V established, which is where the HSI funding mainly lives right now, is under Title V in the federal government for the Higher Education Act, to solely fund these higher HSI institutions. About 20 years later, in 2010, we have our first HSI STEM grant. Now, the reason why is because there's a big gap in Hispanic Latino students getting STEM degrees. So the federal government saw this. We said, okay, we want to establish degrees and resources that are going to target and enable Hispanic and Latino students to get STEM degrees, to get access to this side of the field and to these grants and funding to help support them. Since then, HSIs have grown to over 571 institutions. And I kind of want to dive into that and dive into those numbers because it's important to underscore the reasons why these institutions are growing and why there's a lot of them now. So there are, again, 571 HSIs in the country. They're located in about 30 states and locations, and they represent about 19% of all students. The last graphic, though, really underscores their importance. HSIs enroll about 2/3 of all Latinos in the country. So their impact on this population is massive because they're attaining, they're enrolling, they're graduating from these institutions mainly. So 62% of all Latinos go to HSIs. You'll see that the numbers grow from 2010 to 2021. That is a stark, drastic increase over the years. And you'll see later on that that aligns with the growth of the Hispanic population in the country. 572, depending on who you ask and how you define HSI, that number kind of goes up one and one. You saw 571 in the last slide. There's 572 in this slide. Just kind of depends. HAKU does their measurements a little bit differently. But importantly, I want you to take note of this emerging HSIs and the number here, 400. We'll talk about that later, but that'll be important when we talk about funding. But another statistic that I want to point out here is that HSIs enroll about 31%, almost a third of all Pell eligible students. And that's important too to recognize who these students are. Pell eligible basically means that you are qualified for need-based aid, that you come from like a lower socioeconomic status and you need a little bit help to be able to afford college. And that's okay. But these institutions are enrolling a vast majority of these students. And so what are we doing to make sure that they're being served is the key. So it's important to acknowledge that. One thing you may notice that in 2020, that number kind of went down. Why did that number go down? The pandemic that happened. So that just again underscores that during this year, we lost about 10 HSIs. Why? Because the HSI designation is enrollment based. So you can lose your HSI designation if enrollment does go down, your Hispanic Latino enrollment goes down. So again, we ended up going right back up, thank God, about a net of 2, and we're continuing to grow as you heard earlier. I include this graphic to kind of show you where HSIs are. They're mainly in these states and locations: California, Texas, Puerto Rico, New York, Illinois, Florida, New Mexico, and Puerto Rico. About 80% of all HSIs are located in there. In Texas, we have 102, and that's continuing to grow. Seems like every other day I hear of a new HSI that's reaching that threshold, so that's important. Another reason why I include this graphic is to show the diversity. So most HSIs are some of the most diverse campuses in the United States. You can see that, yes, they enroll, again, almost 2/3 of all Hispanic and Latino students, but they also have large populations of Asian, Native American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders, multiracial students, Black, American Indians, and then, of course, our white students as well. There are very diverse institutions, and so we got to think about, what does service mean when we talk about servingness and service? What does it mean at our different campuses, and depending on what those populations look like, and how can we better serve them? HSIs by sector. So you'll see that a lot of them, there are 40% of them are public 2-year institutions. And then you see the next biggest is public 4-year institutions. The reason for that is our public 2-year institutions are cheaper, more affordable, and they're more accessible because they're in the communities. And what we know about the Hispanic and Latino population is that they tend to stay closer to home. They don't want to go too far. And so these community colleges and junior colleges enable access to higher education. They're more affordable. And again, they're more accessible. You can still go back home to mom and dad afterwards. You can help with the family if you need to. If you need to take the family car, you can take the family car and still be able to make it back, right? And that's why the majority of our HSIs are for public 2-year institutions. But we are seeing a growth in our public 4-year institutions, because now what we're seeing is the population of students that are going to these 2-year schools for junior college, they're transferring. They're going to public 4-year institutions to go for a bachelor's degree as opposed to an associate's degree. So it's important to note that those growth as well, that growth as well. Talking about funding. So I'd mentioned earlier that we're able to apply for grant funding, right? What you see here is the Hispanic enrollment is the yellow line or the orange line that goes across. HSIs also match up with that trend line. As you can see, it goes up. The green bars are those that HSI funds in the millions that the federal government has designated. As you can see, that's not keeping up. Those numbers are not keeping up. And so what we need and what we do every year, we actually go to DC and we actually advocate for Congress to put more money in that pot. Because if we continue to have a growth in HSIs, we need to have more funding for these institutions as well. So that way it's not as competitive to achieve these grant funds. So again, it's important to note that about 400 of those emerging HSIs, which we'll talk about here in a minute, if we added all those institutions overnight, we'd be fighting for that same small pot of money. So, oh, there's my little graphics. Emerging HSIs, let's talk about the definition of those. We call them EHSIs. So institutions of higher education that are approaching that 25%. So one example that I always think of within the Texas Tech University system, we have Midwestern State University in Wichita Falls. They are at about 24.6% Hispanic and Latino. So they're considered an emerging HSI. They're almost there. And that's actually, they're actually already there compared to the new IPEDS numbers. But we need to acknowledge the fact that these institutions are getting close. So when they do achieve that designation, what does it look like when we talk about funding again? We also have graduate HSIs or GHSIs. Sul Ross is a graduate HSI because they offer graduate programs. So it's important to note that these institutions have an even larger responsibility for that socioeconomic impact of uplifting people out of their current situations. So let's talk about the numbers for emerging HSIs. There's 401 in the country in 43 states, and they represent about 13%. Again, if overnight all of these became HSIs, there'd be over 900 HSIs in the country, which would be a great thing, but we have to make sure that we're funding them at the same levels and they're able to access the same amount of grant funds. Same thing for graduate HSIs. So we have 241, they're in 22 states and locations, and they give almost half of all HSIs offer graduate programs, which is huge. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second with this graph. So as you can see, this is a study that was given from a West Coast HSI in 2005 to 2015. The green line you can't really see, but the green line is the undergraduate enrollment at this college. The blue line is the graduate enrollment for Hispanic and Latino students. Those numbers that is a wide gap that we're seeing here. And this is true of most colleges and institutions today, is that we're seeing that growth of Hispanic enrollment in these HSIs, but when it comes to graduate student enrollment, it's not keeping up. And so we need to, again, explore this problem. How do we close that gap? And I have some strategies that I can give you guys afterwards when we answer some questions, but we're already looking at ways in which these institutions, the GHSIs, how are we approaching those problems and those issues on our campuses? And so I want to take a pause here and kind of just ask this question of why. You know, why is this important? Some of you may have kind of glazed over after all those facts and I don't really know why I'm here, or what is the purpose of this? And so one of the things that I read that book, how many of y'all read Start With Why with Simon Sinek? Ever heard that book? Yeah, it's a great book. And I want to pull a quote from there where Simon says, see what I did there? Very few people or companies can clearly articulate the why they do what they do. And by why, I mean your purpose, cause or belief. Why does your company exist? Why do you get out of bed every morning? And why should anyone care? The reason why I point this out and why I grabbed this is your why is going to be important when we start talking about servingness, the ability to serve the students on our campuses. This goes for high school students. It goes for college students as well. What's your why? Why do you wake up every morning? Why do you go to work every morning? Why do you do the specific job on your campus every single day? Why should we care about this growth in Hispanic students? Well, I'm about to point out some more statistics that kind of underscore the importance and the urgency that we have with this issue. But I want you guys to kind of think about this as we're going along with this presentation about what's your why? Why is this important to you? But also, why do you do the things that you do, and how can you fit yourself into this framework? So let's talk about some fast facts. So it's important to understand this population and why we're serving them and why it's important. So Hispanics are 18.9% of the U.S. population in 2021. The Hispanic median age is 29.8, which is nearly a decade younger than non-Hispanic median age of 38.5. So what that means is we are very young and we're at college going age as Hispanic and Latino population. And so it's important when we start considering, okay, almost over half of the K through 12 population in the state of Texas is Hispanic. And so if we know that and we know that they're coming, they're getting to college age, what are we doing to prepare? What are we doing for the services and specific cultural needs of this population? What are we doing to make sure that they feel like they belong on this campus and they can do the things that they need to do to graduate? Again, this underscores 31% of the Hispanic population was under the age of 18 compared to the 22% of non-Hispanic. Again, just underscoring how young this population is. Hispanic enrollment in higher education is expected to exceed 4 million students by 2026. That is right around the corner, far surpassing the other growth rate of any other racial group by over 10%. Hispanic students earned 15.9% of bachelor's degrees conferred in 2020, and that number has gone up a little bit compared to 9.2% in 2011. So again, this is a positive thing. We're seeing a huge trend, and now Hispanic and Latino students are gaining more bachelor's degrees. But again, going back to that previous slide about graduate degrees, we now need to figure out what's that next step. How do we get them from undergrad to going for a master's degree, to going for a professional degree, or for going to go for a PhD? Here's another trend line that you can see the Hispanic population growing. So in 1970, it was at 9.6 million. Now we're up to 62.5 million. And that's continuing to grow on that trend. The population growth from 2010 to 2021, over half of the population growth in the country was Hispanic and Latino people. And so if that's true, over the past 11 years, we've gained about 12 million people. That's massive growth, far outpacing any other ethnicity or group. Now, I want to call attention to this, the two or more races. We are becoming a more multi-ethnic, multi-racial society. There are two or more races, and that's why this is the second largest category here, is because that's becoming the norm. And so, yeah, we're talking about a lot today about Hispanics, but we also need to be talking about Afro-Latinos, Indigenous Latinos, LGBTQIA Latinos, the different identities and the different ethnicities, and how those two things meet and how those experiences change by adding those identities, by adding those different cultural beliefs, even things like religion, ability status, those types of things all matter of how these students are experiencing their college-going life. This was taken by the Texas Tribune, and this is a more recent article, but you can see now the Hispanic population has officially taken over the white population in the state of Texas. So that growth has now far surpassed the white population in the state. So again, what are we doing to make sure that we are not only targeting people to go to college to attain a degree, whatever that looks like, even if it's a trade school, but what are we doing to prepare that population so that their socioeconomic growth can continue to happen, right? And colleges are primed for that. Hispanics now make up 1 in 5 students enrolled at post-secondary education institutions in the United States. You can see that purple is the Hispanic percentage there. You can see that that's just continuing to grow. So that's a good problem. It's a good thing that we're now 1 in 5 students that are enrolled. But when we look at graduation and attainment, that's a little bit different. So you can see that all Latinos, as compared to U.S. adults, most of us are achieving the high school diploma or less range or some college. But we need to grow these numbers of bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees. And the way that we do that is, again, by making sure that we're intentionally serving. And we'll kind of go into that here in a little bit, but I want to, again, underscore the needs of this population. This looks at enrollment versus attainment. So percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds enrolled at least part-time in college in 2021. The Hispanic population is still lagging behind our Black population. Now, if you look at the percentage of 25 to 29-year-olds with bachelor's degree or more, again, we're still attainment-wise are behind all other ethnicities. So again, we are enrolling, but we need to graduate. We need to make sure that we're getting them to the finish line. And the ways that we do that, again, is I think through servingness, and I'll kind of hit on those points here in a minute. advanced degree attainment. So as you can see, the majority of the advanced degrees for Latinos are master's degrees, some with professional degrees like I'm thinking master's degrees or more, or even law degrees. And then doctoral degrees are about 10%. So those numbers have grown. If you are aware of the growth, especially for doctoral degrees, we are seeing a good steady growth of that, but it's still far outpacing where we need to be. The top reasons why Latinos didn't go to college, why they didn't want to attain or achieve a bachelor's degree, they needed to help or support the family. That was the number one reason. They couldn't afford a four-year degree. And those two things go hand in hand. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the population when it comes to financial aid and why we need to make sure that we're graduating and we're considering them, their financial aid in their graduation plan. So Hispanic and Latinos, they do not receive as much financial aid despite having lower expected family contributions. Most financial aid awards focus on academic achievement rather than financial need. So this is important because you may be focused your scholarships on GPA. Like they're all focused on just making sure that they have a certain GPA, as opposed to this student needs the funds to be able to stay in college. We need to kind of shift the way that we're thinking about how we're financing our students. Latino students, like their low-income peers, tend to work more to pay for school and costs, and may be more likely to be a part-time student as a result. So most Latino students are more likely to work a second job than to take out a loan. And so when we think about, okay, these students, okay, you can't afford it, it's okay, just take out a loan. No, they're more likely to not even do that. They may apply for financial aid, but they may not even get as much as their peers. And on top of that, they would rather work. And so when we think about maybe our late night programming or like our programming that happens during the day, you may hold a tutoring fair or a study hall night at like 6 o'clock, but this population is working. They're more likely to be working in the evenings or maybe participating in other things. Or you think about, okay, the importance of student organizations and making sure that they feel a sense of belonging, a sense of community. But those organizations are meeting at 6 or 7 o'clock at night when they're going to their second job or going to their first job. And so what are we doing to make sure that we're enabling and financing these students so they don't have to work a second job or they don't have to work a job in the first place? And then financial aid policies that have a stringent time to degree requirements. So again, I talked about earlier that Latinos tend to go to 2-year schools, right, before going to a 4-year institution. That stretches out time to degree for some of our students. So even just they go to a 2-year school doesn't necessarily mean that they're graduating within those 2 years. It may be 2, 3, 4 years. And they may go to a 4-year school and they may be like, you know what, this is a lot. I need to take my time and be a part-time student because I have to work to afford this. And so that's, again, setting me back in order to finish and graduate. Most scholarships or financial aid go to only 4-year or 6-year time constraints. And so because of that, after that 6th year, you run out of funding. And then what? Then what do you do? And so we need to, again, look at that, look at it a little bit more critically. How can we extend that, even if it's at the university level, to make sure that we're financing our students and they don't have to worry about that stress? Now I want to kind of go into the HSI research. So when I say research, I mean scholars, people that are educators that are looking at this problem. Some of my really good friends are cited in here. Dr. Gina Garcia is one of the main ones that I cite in most of my work. She's one of the leading scholars in this field. But I want to underscore that there are people looking at this problem. I know it seems like a lot, and it seems like, okay, like now you've got all the information. Now what can I do? What are some ways that scholars are saying that we can improve? Well, I'm going to kind of walk you through some of it. So why is servingness hard to define? So servingness, when I talk about servingness, we basically mean the strategies, the environment, the different people, the motive, the inspiration, the intentional impact that we're trying to achieve. That's what servingness is. It's how do we intentionally serve our Latino students? So when I talk about servingness, actually Dr. Gina Garcia coined that term, and we now use it widely across all higher ed. But why is it so hard to define? Because it is. The U.S. population, Hispanic population, continues to increase and diversify. So we talk about Hispanic, but again, going back to the earlier point, Hispanic is a huge umbrella term. We're talking about very different. A Puerto Rican student is very different than a Hispanic student that lives in West Texas, or Mexican-American student that lives in West Texas. A California Mexican-American student is way different from a Venezuelan student that goes to a school in New York. Those are very different experiences. So that's why it's hard for campuses to define it. Also, also where it's nuanced to each campus. So think about what day-to-day life is like in West Texas, what it's like here at Sul Ross, what it's like in the community. Now think about going to an HSI in Puerto Rico. That is vastly different from, thinking about just walking outside and seeing just water everywhere, as opposed to here where you look outside and see beautiful mountains. But it's just a different experience, right? Also, the difference in size. So we talk about a school like a 2-year school, like a Midland College, for example, as opposed to a Texas Tech University, right? Those are massively different schools and a massively different experience for college students. And again, geographic location, population diversity, and institution type. Thinking about the differences between a 2-year and a 4-year school, a private school versus a public school, thinking about the location again, and thinking about how those locations also depend on the diversification of their population, of their Hispanic population. So this is hard. It's really hard to figure out how to do this. How do we serve our people? And each campus needs to kind of explore what their definition of servingness is, because again, the populations are going to look different on each campus and depending on where they are in the region. So what Dr. Gina Garcia and colleagues, Vanessa Sanson and Anne-Marie Nunez did is they took all the HSI literature, all the scholarship, and they combined it to form this multidimensional framework for servingness. This is an abbreviated version because they have a nice little version of it, but I couldn't get it to where it looked very nice on this page. But it's kind of just outlines the different frameworks, and we're going to kind of go through each of these, but I'm going to break it down to you so you kind of understand what they mean. Now, this is also limited because this is scholarship that was done at the time of the study. So we have advanced since this. There are some things that are missing, but we can acknowledge that and add to this as we learn. Let's start with structures for serving. These are the tangible things that we can see, we can feel on our campuses. So thinking about what we can see at an HSI like Sul Ross. Structures for serving. What does our mission and value statement say? Do they acknowledge that we're an HSI? Do they acknowledge that we serve a diverse population of students? Now there's some complications, obviously, with the change in the state, which I'll kind of hit on that later. But the mission and value statements, that's our institutional North Star. That's where I can look every day and say, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Those are our values. That's our mission for our institution. If we don't acknowledge the populations that we serve or that we are an HSI, then we may need to rethink that. How do we message that? How do we do that? Diversity plans, again, a little bit complication with that, but figuring out how we are making sure that we're retaining and educating and promoting a diverse student population. HSI grants, we talked about how we utilize those grants to help these populations as well. Institutional advancement activities, those are our fundraising activities. How can we fundraise to help? Engagement with the Latino community. So again, this is just as important that we are talking about this as a campus, but also in the Alpine and UTR or RGV campuses as well, to make sure that we understand what our community needs are and how that fits into the larger goal of our campuses. Compositional diversity, our faculty, staff, and admin and graduate students, are they Latino? Do they speak Spanish? How can we make it look like and they can see to where these students can see themselves in these institutions, that they feel like they belong, that they feel like they're a part of the university. Culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy, which I'm going to hit on this here in a minute. How are we making sure that our students feel like they are a part of what they are learning? And then programs and services for minoritized students. So we're thinking of any sort of culturally validating experiences, which I'll hit on later. Leadership and decision-making practices, incentive structures, and then external boundary management, the external boundary management of the university, but also the town as well. How are we making sure that we're not crossing those lines? Let's hit on culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy, because this culturally responsive teaching can be kind of confusing. What does that mean? Especially to somebody who really isn't in higher ed, what does that truly mean? And I think Dr. Tyrone Howard really did a good job at kind of figuring this definition out. So what culturally responsive teaching means is using the students' cultural norms or customs and ways of being to better improve classroom instruction. It also rests on the premise that the student should not sacrifice cultural knowledge in pursuit of their academic excellence. So a good way to think about that is, as a student, if I speak Spanish or I feel more comfortable speaking Spanish, the moment that I take a step into your classroom, do I feel comfortable speaking Spanish? Do I feel comfortable talking about my identity as a Latino or talking about my experiences as a Latino in your classroom, in your office, in your environment, wherever you guys are at? Do I feel comfortable being who I really am and honoring my culture? So it's calling upon us to basically take those cultural needs and amplify them. Don't diminish them. Actually utilize that in your teaching, utilize those strengths. Don't know what happened there. Academic outcomes. What are some things that we're looking for with academic outcomes? We want positive academic outcomes for Hispanic Latino students. One way that we measure that is through GPA, course completion, 6-year graduation. Again, we already talked about the limitation of that. College completion as a whole. Transfer rates, what are we doing and making sure we have articulation agreements with either community colleges or with other 4-year institutions for maybe graduate degrees. STEM degree completion, post-bac enrollment, and then labor market outcomes, making sure that after the students come here, that they are attaining jobs, that they have good paying jobs. What are we doing to track that? What are we doing to make sure that they are coming back and helping and serving the communities? But what are we doing to make sure that they are set up for success whenever they do graduate? Because servingness goes beyond just their time here. It even starts before with high school students, and it starts after whenever they finish, right? Let's talk about non-academic outcomes. So these non-academic outcomes are like the academic self-concept basically means that you believe in what you're studying, that you can do it. Basically, that you believe in yourself, you believe that you understand this, and that you feel like you can do your degree. One of the things that I struggled with being a biology student at Angelo State was that I didn't know really too much about biology, especially at that critical level of college. I kind of had imposter syndrome. I didn't really know that I could do this. I didn't think I could do this. I was in a new environment. I didn't have anybody that I knew around me. But whenever I found somebody that gave me the confidence, I found mentors at my campus. They said, you can do this. I did this. You can do this. And so they helped me. So again, this is a big, how do we make sure that these students are achieving academic self-concept, that they truly believe that they can do what they're set out here to do? Social agency, that they have the ability to advocate for themselves and advocate for their needs. Racial identity, one of the things that I always point out is in my life growing up, I never really knew who Cesar Chavez was or who Dolores Huerta was. I learned about those people whenever I went to college, and I learned more through my student organization. And so what are we doing even before they get to college to make sure that they understand what it means to be in their racial category or their ethnic identity? How are we as a college educating students about their racial identity? Another ways that we do that is through cultural programming. So we think about like our Hispanic Heritage Month programming. All of those cultural experiences are important to teach because again, even using myself as an example, I didn't know some of this stuff. I have no idea who these people are or what they did for our population, et cetera. And so I learned. Leadership identity, how are we giving and building leaders for the next generation? Critical consciousness, really understanding how to critically evaluate issues. Social justice orientation, again, fighting for the needs and wants of the minoritized populations. And then civic engagement. What are we doing as campuses to encouraging students to vote? What are we doing to, make sure that they're involved in civic duties? Like maybe they're serving their communities in different ways, serving on boards or committees or whatever that looks like. Even if it's not on campus, what are we doing in the community at large as well? And then graduate school aspirations, making sure that they are wanting to go on to that next step, and how do we enable them to go to that next step? Talking about validating and racialized experiences. So I already kind of hit on that a little bit with validating experiences. Interactions with same race and ethnicity peers, cultural validation on campus. So again, those are seeing things on campus that make you feel like you belong, make you feel like you're being seen. So I think of cultural programming like Hispanic Heritage Month, having a mariachi on campus to celebrate the beginning of the semester. Some other ways that we've seen, especially in the research, is like artwork. One of the research studies that I did, one of the students said to me, I see this painting of Frida Kahlo, and I see myself here. I'm an art student. I see myself. I feel like my culture is represented here. Now, how can we amplify that? How can we show that in multiple places around campus? Maybe we have a painting, or maybe we have some sort of educational programming that happens in each of our colleges or each of our buildings to represent that we are an HSI and that your culture is welcomed here. Having Spanish-speaking peers, faculty, and staff. Again, Spanish speakers, it's important to have the ability to speak Spanish if that's your first language. Especially if you're learning for the first time, or if you're like a DACA student and you're coming here and your Spanish is the #1 language in your household, and you're still kind of struggling with that. How do we ensure that we're hiring faculty and staff members that understand Spanish and can actually help guide these students throughout their journey? And then again, mentoring and support groups, making sure that those mentors, and we have like the student organizations established. Those are all validating experiences for the students. Now we have racialized experiences. These are the things that we don't want, what we don't want to happen on our campuses, which are discrimination, harassment, or microaggressions. Making sure that we're limiting any form of discrimination or harassment is important, because again, we want to have more of these validation. We want to make sure that they have a good sense of belonging while they're here, as opposed to feeling like they don't belong, feeling like they're being targeted. We want to make sure that this part of servingness is at our forefront of our thinking, because this still happens today, unfortunately, and it happens every single day. We just may not see it. And so we want to make sure that we're combating it by having these validating experiences as well. External influences on serving. How am I doing on time? Okay, cool. External influences on serving. So we have federal legislation. Again, this is making sure that we are talking with our federal legislators to make sure that we are increasing funding for HSIs. State legislation is another way that is affecting the way that we enact servingness. One way that we do is happening currently is SB 17. If you're familiar with SB 17, it's the anti-DEI bill. This has changed the way that we think about how we enact servingness. So this is one way that external influences do influence how we enact some of these things on our campuses. Local legislation like city and localities, institutional governing boards like Board of Regents for system schools, state governing boards like the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, advocacy groups like HACU, Excelencia, all of those are all external groups, and then community leaders and alumni. How are we utilizing these last two? This is the one that I really want to hit on, because especially here, knowing and being from this region, we have great alumni. We have great alumni and we have great community leaders. How are we leveraging these community leaders to be a part of the mission of Sul Ross being an HSI and advocating for the service of our minoritized populations? And so I want to kind of go into this support. How are we supporting? Why is it important? Well, funding is one way that we're supporting. We want to make sure that we're giving those funds to our students, but also making sure that we're funding programs, making sure that we're hiring people, making sure that we're again, employing and also advocating when maybe there's not a lot of us in the room. Maybe if you're at the seat of the table for a leadership meeting and you're able to advocate for this group, you should do so. That's one way that we can continue to support these Hispanic and Latino population, is funding, employment, and advocacy. Impact. These institutions have a huge impact on the educational access and attainment for these students. Again, these are the main colleges that these students are looking for. So how can we then turn that around into a positive thing that students are looking for HSIs? They're looking to go to an HSI because look, these HSIs are tasked with serving minoritized, low income, Pell eligible, underserved students. They are taking special attention to make sure that they serve you. So how can I make sure that we're communicating that? And again, they have a social responsibility for that socioeconomic mobility piece, right? If we're telling these students to go to college, get a degree, do all these things, these institutions are enrolling a high amount of Hispanics. And so it is our responsibility to then push them through. What are we doing to enable and graduate and retain and get them to graduate school and get them to better jobs for that socioeconomic mobility to happen? And then community development, again, focusing on how are we partnering community-wise to make sure that we're not only growing our servingness on our campus, but also servingness and broad in our communities. And so again, going to the responsibility piece, comunidad is important. It is our responsibility as HSIs to establish a community that supports our populations, the students that we serve, not just Hispanic and Latino students, but all of our students. How are we taking responsibility for establishing that community? But how are we also taking responsibility for establishing a culture, a cultura, that supports our populations? That not only supports them, but it gets them through. It makes them feel like they belong. It makes them feel like they're supposed to be here, like they're part of the Lobo family, right? What are we doing to establish that culture, not only on our campus, but also in our programs, in our classrooms, and in our offices? All of that matters. Culture is different depending on where you go and the different environments that you're in. So it's important to establish that. And the last one is accountability. How are we holding each other accountable? Not only our campus, our administrators, but also each other. If you see you have an ability to advocate for this population or to advocate for HSI initiatives, you should do so and do so unapologetically. We want to make sure that we're holding each other accountable so that we can achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve, which is, again, that socioeconomic mobility and graduating and retaining Hispanic and Latino students. Briefly, I want to kind of hit on the Sul Ross story. You know, there's a lot missing in here, but this is really what I could find in preparation for this presentation. But again, in 1999, Sul Ross became an HSI. Since then, there's been at least two that I could find online. Was that you achieved in fall 2020, were awarded a $2.8 million DHSI grant, and then you recently got another one, a 2.91. That's amazing. Schools and institutions fight for this every single year for these funds. The fact that Sul Ross is getting access to these funds, and especially these large award amounts, is impressive, and it's a really good thing. And so students, if you're here and you realize that this money is available, you can know that your institution is doing a good job at figuring out ways to tell the federal government, we're serving you. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's the money and here's how we're going to serve you. And that's important because other schools, especially two-year schools, aren't able to get access to some of these monies. So we want to make sure that we are honoring that. So that's an amazing thing. And I just want to kind of highlight that the journey started in 1999 and you guys are rocking it, especially with getting HSI grants. Now, how do we turn these HSI grants and turn it into servingness and make sure that it's an everyday practice, an everyday piece of our identity as an HSI? I want to do some little quick peer comparisons. Those that are highlighted in orange in the Texas State University system are HSIs. And those that are in the blue are Seal of Excellencia schools. So the Seal of Excellencia, very briefly, is a designation given to HSIs that are going above and beyond. It's by education, excellency in education, and they're basically giving you a little seal saying that you're one of the top HSIs in the country. And there are currently only 39 Seal of Excellencia schools in the country. That's important because all of us, especially all of our HSIs, we're all going after that seal. We're all trying to be the top. We're all trying to be better. And so in the Texas State University system, this is how we stand. We've got 4 HSIs, a couple PWIs, and a couple emerging HSIs in Lamar and Lamar Institution of Technology. Now you guys are entering the Lone Star Conference. The Lone Star Conference is massive. As somebody who ran track in the Lone Star Conference, it is huge. You can see there the amount of HSIs are located or are highlighted in yellow. And again, those that are designated as a Seal of Excellencia school, those are highlighted. So Texas Women's University and Angelo State University just recently earned the Seal of Excellencia this past month. I went to DC. We was really happy and proud of my alma mater, Angelo State, for earning that. But now what are we doing as our campus at Sul Ross? What are we doing to achieve the seal? That's our next step. That's our next step in showing and showing the world and the country that we are an HSI and we're intentionally serving HSI. And regional. So as you can see, regionally, there's a lot of HSIs around here. When you look at our peers in the region, Angelo State, that's pretty much as far east as I went. You know, some people consider Angelo State west, some people don't. I fight them all the time. I don't consider it West Texas, but whatever. Some people say Lubbock's west, but I say that's Panhandle. That's not, yeah. And then El Paso Community College, Midland, Odessa, Sul Ross, TTU, HSC El Paso, mainly for our nursing students that are HSC El Paso, and then UTPB, and then UTEP. You can see the CO designated schools, and then the other ones are HSIs. The reason why I point this out is to really show our Marfa students, there is a lot of HSIs around you. That if you wanted to stay in this region, there are schools here in this region that are intentionally serving Hispanic and Latino students, but not just that, there are services that will benefit all students, because all of these strategies that we are implementing with these grants are available to all the students. And they're taking special care to make sure that you have access to higher education. So look at these colleges, look at these different things, especially this one that's right in your backyard. That's where I started. So be sure that you look at that. Look at schools if they're an HSI. And if they're an HSI, look at how they're identifying themselves as an HSI. Is it on their website? Do they have an HSI grant? What is the HSI grant for? Those are the types of things you should look at when you're looking at colleges and universities. It's a little extra step. I know it's hard, and it's more of like, oh, I'm a UT fan. I want to go to UT. Yay. That's fine too. But just take a look at what they're doing as an HSI, because I was that person too. And I looked at different schools, et cetera, in that way. So we're at the 5 takeaways. So again, if you completely tuned me out this entire time, welcome back. These 5 takeaways are going to be for you to really kind of focus on. The HSI institutions are here, and they're continuing to grow rapidly. So again, we need to pay attention to not only the growing demographic, the complex demographic that these students are and the identities that they hold, but also the complexity of the institutions that are around us that are earning this designation and how we're partnering with these schools. Because as HSIs, we could easily, if we don't have a degree in, say, engineering for a master's or a PhD degree, we could easily be partnering with other HSIs that have those degrees to encourage our students to prepare them for graduate school or to prepare them from a community college to come to Sul Ross to get the degrees that maybe they didn't have. What kind of scholarships are we giving them? What kind of services are we setting up? Are we doing summer bridge programs? There's several different ways that we can partner with other HSIs, and we need to be aware of it. The Hispanic population continues to grow. It's young, and we must aid in their socioeconomic mobility. It's happening. We can't stop it. The Hispanic population is going to continue to grow. And so as colleges and universities, our promise, the contract with society is that you come to our schools, we give you a degree, you get a better job, or you get a better paying job. That's the social contract with higher education. So now, turning that around on us, what are we doing to make sure that if we're serving a large population of a minoritized population, what are we doing to make sure that they're graduating? What kind of services are we offering, et cetera? And how are we looking at those intersectional identities? Undergraduate degree attainment is growing, but we must also look at the graduate and professional schools. Again, highlighting the fact that, yes, we are growing the undergraduate enrollment and maybe even some bachelor's degrees attainment. But what are we doing to take that next step? We should already be looking at that. Like, yes, we are growing our enrollment. That's great. But what are we looking at when we talk about graduate school? What are we looking at when we're talking about degree completion and going into the workforce, our workforce outcomes, et cetera? Servingness is hard to define, but it's not impossible. Every college and university should be having this conversation that especially if they're an HSI, I say even if they're not an HSI, but you can start having the HSI conversation even before you're an HSI. If you're an emerging HSI, you should already be having this conversation. What does servingness mean on our campus? And again, servingness, even though it is in the context of Hispanic and Latino students, you can expand that. You can expand that to any minoritized population. You can expand it to any population on your campus. What are we doing to make sure that we are looking at each individual student, looking at each individual student population and how we're meeting the needs of those populations, looking at stopgap, looking at graduation rate, looking at retention rate. What is the retention rate from 3rd year to 4th year, from 2nd year to 3rd year? Like all of those metrics and data are so crucial to figuring out what servingness means on our campuses. So being sure that we're looking at that. And then HSIs have a responsibility to intentionally serve their target populations and think critically about the ways in which we serve. Again, it's all about that why. I go back to the very beginning when I asked you, what's your why? Why is it important for us to be an HSI? Why is it important for us to understand these concepts? Well, I hope after this, you kind of walked away with the urgency of this is happening. We are growing HSIs and we're continuing to grow the Hispanic and Latino population. We have to figure out how we're going to serve this population if we want to continue to contribute to that socioeconomic mobility and getting those better paying jobs for this population, making sure that we're graduating and getting them better paying jobs and better status in society as well. And so we must think critically about how we're intentionally serving all of our students. Maybe not being Hispanic enrolling, but being truly Hispanic serving. These are some additional resources to consider. HACU, the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, Excelencia in Education, and Escala are additional external resources that I use every single day. They're ways that we can engage in professional development. For those of you that work at Sul Ross or work in communities, you can go to these institutions and literally ask them for resources, and they're great. Most of the graphics that I use today come from HACU and Excelencia. And then Escala does really good at showing and doing different workshops with colleges and universities. So just wanted to point that out. Well, I want to kind of just hit on some last little things here. If you're into podcasts, there is a podcast. Dr. Gina Garcia it's called Que Pasa HSIs. This is a really cool podcast, and I'm a little bit biased because I'm on the first season. But it's a really cool podcast to really understand what HSIs are and how they're doing the work. They're already in their third season of Que Pasa HSIs. And so basically what Dr. Garcia does is she interviews HSI Scholar Practitioners like myself and get more about what's happening across the country. How are they defining servingness? And so it's a good thing to just put on in the car when you're on your way to work. That's what I do. Actually, when I was traveling down here, I was listening and catching up to the podcast. And there's just so much good, insightful, rich things that happen, little nuggets of information that you can take and apply to everyday life as you're working here at Sul Ross. So definitely encourage you to listen to that, and especially season 1, episode 7. And this is my contact information. If you want, that's a link to my LinkedIn. You can scan that. And I'm sure there's another one with the survey. Please fill out that survey. We want to make sure that I'm improving and that we're getting things out of this. If you want, please follow me on LinkedIn. If you ever need anything, this is my email, and my email is also on my LinkedIn too. But again, before I kind of step off here, I just want to say thank you again for your time. I really appreciate your attention. And again, this is so important. This subject cannot be understated, that we continue to focus on this population and these HSIs, because these HSIs are doing an amazing job and amazing work, and we need to honor them, but we also need to challenge ourselves to think about how we're serving this population. Thank you.